Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, and the collapse of civilization. P.D. Ouspensky and George Gurdjieff discerned the imminent and cyclical decline of civilization as the First World War quite literally changed our world forever. Their formidable years as writers and as sages were spent in the cauldron of the Great War, and this experience changed them. Let's look at Ouspensky first, in a little-known collection of articles from 1919 that he wrote for the New Age magazine, a publication edited by A.R. Orage, as he and his friends escaped the growing threat of the Bolshevik regime in Russia as the first stages of the Soviet Union and the atheistic tyranny of communism began to tighten its grip. I have a first edition 1978 copy of these, entitled Letters from Russia 1919. And Ouspensky dramatically goes into details about the reality of narrowly escaping death at the hands of the Bolsheviks. One of the remarkable aspects of these articles is that they were written on the run, as they fled Russian soil and made for Turkey, as the world went from 4 years of self-slaughter, where over 40 million would die, to a pandemic as the Spanish flu began to spread worldwide, eventually eclipsing the death toll of the Great War itself, with over 50 million dead within a few months. The availability of food and goods became an enormous issue for Ouspensky as profiteering and inflation took hold. As lawlessness and brutality spread to every aspect of human existence, Ouspensky and his friends were in survival mode, trying to cling onto what hope they had left, as they literally had only the clothes on their backs as a defense against the feral collapse of the old way of life in pre-communist Russia. He and his friends had to watch this collapse happen in real time as humanity fell, and fell hard. Now Gurdjieff. He speaks of this time as well in Ouspensky's classic book entitled In Search of the Miraculous. Early in Chapter 2, Ouspensky writes about Gurdjieff addressing the issue of available knowledge and the task of obtaining this knowledge. In Search of the Miraculous is essentially the rewording of talks Gurdjieff gave to eager students in the early stages of World War I around 1914 and 1915 in Moscow and Petersburg. This issue of knowledge was of keen importance to Gurdjieff, known as G in the text, as he introduced an idea to the groups that knowledge was of a material quality. Ouspensky writes that G said, quote, "Knowledge, like everything else in the world, is material. It is material, and this means that it possesses all the characteristics of materiality. There are periods in the life of humanity which generally coincide with the beginning of the fall of cultures and civilizations, when the masses irretrievably lose their reason and begin to destroy everything that has been created by centuries and millenniums of culture. Such periods of mass madness, often coinciding with geological cataclysms, climactic changes, and similar phenomenon of a planetary character, release a very great quantity of the matter of knowledge." Prior to meeting the overwhelming personality of George Gurdjieff, P.D. Ouspensky had quite a career of his own as a mathematician, an author, and lecturer. In the finest example of his skills as a writer, he produced, mostly before 1914, a book entitled A New Model of the Universe. At the end of the introduction, he writes these words as he has just learned upon his return from a journey to India and Ceylon that the Great War had begun. Quote, "The first word I heard on landing was war. There began then strange muddled days. Everything was thrown into confusion. But I already felt that my search in one sense was ended. And I understood then why I had all the time felt that it was necessary to hurry. a new cycle was beginning. And it was as yet impossible to say what it would look like and to what it would lead. One thing only was clear from the first, that what was possible yesterday became impossible today. All the mud was rising from the bottom of life. All the cards became mixed. All the threads were broken. There remained only what I had established for myself. Nobody could take that from me, and it alone would lead me further. End quote. In A New Model of the Universe, he goes on to write this about the civilization of the West, even prior to the cataclysm of the Great War over 100 years ago. He writes, "The civilization of our time is a pale and sickly growth, which can hardly keep itself alive in the darkness of profound barbarism." End quote. He distinguishes between civilization and barbarism even a century ago, stating that what is believed to be civilized society was in reality based in barbarism. Civilization, if it is to be distinguished from barbarism, must be fed and nourished by what he calls the esoteric circle. He writes this: "Civilization, on the contrary, having come from outside, can only exist and develop by receiving outside help, that is, the help of the esoteric circle. But the evolving forms of barbarism very soon cut off civilization from its source. And then civilization, losing confidence in the reason for its separate existence, begins to serve the developed forms of barbarism in the belief that here lie its aims and destiny. All forms created by civilization undergo a process of change and adapt themselves to the new order of things, that is to say, become subservient to barbarism." End quote. He points out that civilization and barbarism can only coexist for a relatively short period of time before civilization begins to buckle under the weight of the degenerative effects of the violence and imbecility that are at the foundation of barbarism. Humanity begins to degenerate under this weight. Ouspensky writes, "Man lives in the satisfaction of his appetites, in fears and struggle and vanity, in distraction and amusements, in stupid sports, in games of skill and chance, in greed of gain and sensuality, in dull daily work, in cares and anxieties of the day, and more than anything else in obedience and in the enjoyment of obedience, because there is nothing that the average man likes better than to obey. If he ceases to obey one force, he immediately begins to obey another. If we do not shut our eyes to all this, we shall realize that we cannot, at the best, call ourselves anything but civilized barbarians. That is, barbarians possessed of a certain degree of culture." Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and their enigmatic colleague, Boris Moraviev, all speak of the work in terms of the level of intensity of work. They speak of the need for individuals to know and understand the high level of self-evaluation and serious inner psychological work that is needed in order to rise out of these influences of barbarism as it quickly overtakes civilization. Ouspensky in particular speaks of this in A New Model of the Universe when he writes, "The whole of the animal world is a continuous caricature of human life. There is much in men that has to be cast away before they can be real men. And people are afraid of this because they do not know what they will have left. Perhaps something will remain, but very little. And would anyone have the courage to make such an experiment? Perhaps some people will dare, but where are they?" End quote. Jesus Christ, indeed, speaks of this casting off of the barbaric nature within each of us during the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, when he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."